Hi there. This little video is going to cover the events of the Korean War from 1950 to 53. A bit of background again. So, Japan occupied all of Korea during the Second World War, a very brutal leadership during that time. When the war ended, well, the Soviets came down from the north, they occupied the north and were determined to make it a communist state. The United States, they occupied it from the south, determined to keep it a capitalist state. And it was agreed that Korea be divided along the 30th parallel of latitude until there was some form of like a agreement between for the future of Korea itself. So you have in the north, you have North Korea, obviously a communist state. It's backed by the Soviet Union and it is led by Kim Il Sung. The south, it is capitalist. It's backed by the United States. It's not democratic. It's led by Syngman Rhee, who was quite a corrupt politician, not very popular, but still the United States wanted it to remain a capitalist state. And both sides obviously want unification, but on their own terms. So 25th of June 1950, Kim Il Sung, the North Korean leader, decides he's going to take a gamble. And he sends 90,000 North Koreans into South Korea across the border, breaking the 30th parallel, breaking any agreements that are there. And he has the backing of Stalin and the backing of Mao Zedong from China in this invasion. And the hope was that he could just knock the state of South Korea out of existence. Okay, it's very quickly they managed to make rapid advances across the border, taking Seoul, which is not very far from the 30th parallel, and moving on south. So the North Koreans seem to be doing very well. In fact, they do so well that they trap the South Koreans in a pocket called the Pusan Pocket down in the southeast of the country. And it looks as if South Korea is going to be squeezed out of existence and the North is going to win. However, as you know, the United Nations, with very heavy backing of the United States, forms a force that's determined to, roll this back and stop this invasion from the North. Remember, the Soviet Union is boycotting the United Nations this time, so cannot stop, cannot veto any decisions made by the United Nations. And this gives the United States the opportunity to get involved, and involved they get because General Douglas MacArthur, very, very famous World War II American general, begins to lead a United Nations force. Now, that United Nations force is made up of 90% American forces, but it does have other nationalities as well, including British forces and some from Northern Ireland as well, including the Royal Ulster Rifles. And they were able to see a lot of combat in Korea. MacArthur very successfully actually creates a move that really surprises the North Koreans. He has a seaborne landing at Incheon. You can see Incheon in the middle of Korea on the western side. And this has the threat of actually cutting off all the invading North Korean forces that have invaded south. And it sends the North Koreans into a rapid retreat back to the 30th parallel. So MacArthur has a really, really impressive impact on the war. The next element here, though, is where perhaps MacArthur goes too far, because between Truman and MacArthur, they decide that their initial goal of containment, to contain communism, basically that means to keep it at the 30th parallel and to revert back to the North Korean state. Well, they're going beyond this. They decide to actually go for a policy of rollback, which means going beyond the 30th parallel and trying to reunite Korea under capitalism and basically knocking out the North Korean state. So MacArthur takes his United Nations force beyond the 30th parallel and well into North Korea. But for one neighbouring country, this is a step too far because they fear for their own existence. And that country is China. China, after years of brutal civil war, became communist in 1949, and they are not prepared to see American forces endanger their new state. So United Nations forces were approaching the Yalu River, which makes it's basically the northern border between North Korea and China. And as the United Nations forces neared this, the Chinese grew very suspicious that the United States would aim to move into China next. And the Chinese leader, Mao Zedong, was determined to halt the United Nations advance. And in January 1951, a huge surprise attack happened when up to 350,000 Chinese troops sweep across into North Korea, surprising the United Nations forces and driving them back beyond the 30th parallel. Truman was very angry with MacArthur. He really didn't trust his instinct to try to push too far towards China, because Truman had the suspicion that the Chinese would intervene if they got too close, and Truman fired MacArthur for insubordination. Well, what happens next is a stalemate, because between 1951 and 1953, both sides fought a long and very hard and bitter struggle, bogged down in stalemate. No one side can make massive advances. So all this was able to see was huge casualties on both sides in very difficult conditions. And it was only when Eisenhower became United States President in 1953 and the Soviet dictator Stalin died in March 1953 that there's a possibility of an armistice. And this is the real possibility to end this war, which has lasted years, cost billions of dollars and millions of lives. And on the 27th of July 1953, that armistice was eventually signed. This brought the war to an end. It kept Korea divided, but it kept it divided with deeply divided ideologies on both sides of that border, and a high degree of tension, which actually remains there to this day. If you're watching the news, you can see the element of danger remaining in Korea. Thank you very much for listening. I do appreciate it.